So imagine, just for a second, a state of mind where your brain isn't just this, biological computer endlessly crunching through yesterday's awkward conversations.
Right, or today's stress, or tomorrow's endless to-do lists.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine instead that it's functioning as this hypersensitive quantum antenna, perfectly tuned to the fundamental frequencies of the universe itself.
It sounds like sci-fi, I know.
It really does. But what if the ancient masters, the figures we read about in esoteric texts like Christ or Buddha or Krishna, what if they weren't just speaking in poetic metaphors to comfort us?
What if all that mystical language was actually describing a highly specific, measurable biological reality? That's the question we're looking at today.
And it is completely mind-bending because it completely shatters how we usually approach spirituality. We're so culturally conditioned to view enlightenment as this purely abstract, ethereal concept.
Yeah, like something that happens up in the clouds, totally divorced from the physical body.
Exactly. But when you actually start looking at the microscopic architecture of human anatomy, from neurobiology down to cellular metabolism, you find the exact mechanical hardware required to house these massive shifts in consciousness.
You really do. And that is exactly what we are getting into in this deep dive. We're decoding the ultimate biological upgrades to human consciousness.
And honestly, the sources we have in front of us today represent one of the most fascinating intersections of knowledge I've ever seen. We're bridging hard, cutting-edge science.
Stuff like advanced neuroacoustic research and quantum biology.
Right, and the biophysics of cellular metabolism, bridging all of that with ancient frameworks like Taoist internal alchemy and Kundalini Tantra. Our mission for you today, the listener, is to map out these superconscious brainwave states.
We want to give you a concrete understanding of the physics and anatomy involved, plus the actual actionable blueprint to start accessing them safely.
Yeah, because what stands out immediately when you cross-reference these disciplines is the staggering delay in our modern scientific understanding.
It's almost embarrassing, honestly.
Yeah.
We're looking at ancient traditions that functionally mapped the central nervous system, the endocrine system, and human fluid dynamics thousands of years before the invention of the EEG or the MRI machine.
Thousands of years. Now, obviously, they didn't use terms like quantum tunneling or neurotransmitters, right, or cerebrospinal fluid dynamics.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
But their pragmatic mapping of how energy moves through the body and how to biologically manipulate it was flawlessly precise.
It really makes you rethink what ancient technology actually was. Okay, before we can even talk about how to build the biological engine for enlightenment, we need to map out the destination. We have to talk about brainwaves.
Great. Let's establish a baseline. Where do you and I, and basically everyone listening, spend 99% of our lives?
Good place to start. So at the top of the normal spectrum, you've got beta. That's roughly 13 to 30 hertz.
And beta is essentially the frequency of modern survival. It's our normal, alert, waking state. It's highly analytical, externally focused, intensely logical.
But it's also where we freak out, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the bandwidth where we experience anxiety, stress, chronic worry. It's a very fragmented state of perception.
Okay, so below that, as you start to relax, you drop into alpha, which is around 8 to 12 hertz. I always think of alpha as that feeling when you're, staring out a window on a train, just letting your mind wander.
Yeah, that daydreaming state. It's the state of inner pondering.
Yeah.
Often it's what you hit in stand-in mindfulness or Zen meditation, where you maintain an open, relaxed focus.
Right. And then as your internal brakes engage even further, you transition down into theta, vibrating between 4 and 8 hertz.
Which is the realm of the subconscious. It's where dreaming sleep occurs. In meditative practices, theta is associated with deep emotional processing, shamanic journeying.
Sudden flashes of vivid creativity, right? Processing deep-seated memories.
Precisely. And then finally, at the very bottom of the standard menu, we have delta, which is 0.5 to 4 hertz. This is your deepest, dreamless, restorative sleep.
Your brain is basically barely ticking over at that point.
Yeah, but in advanced meditative terms, dropping consciously into delta is often associated with entering the void or perceiving a state of formless white light.
Which is where deep-level yogic adepts can actually slow their respiration and heartbeat to the point where, like, a doctor might struggle to even find a pulse.
Exactly. So those four, beta, alpha, theta, and delta, they form the accepted spectrum of human consciousness in standard neurology.
Right, but the data coming out of advanced clinical research over the last few decades absolutely shatters that ceiling.
It really does. The work pioneered by the Center for Neuroacoustic Research and early observational studies from places like the Neuroscience Unit at the University of Birmingham They reveal measurable states of consciousness that go vastly beyond that standard menu.
So let's climb up the ladder. Above beta, we hit a state called gamma. Talk to me about what is happening in the brain at 30 to 100 hertz.
So gamma waves, with 40 hertz being the most heavily studied baseline for this state, they represent a massive leap in cognitive processing. When neuroscientists observe robust gamma activity, they're witnessing a biological phenomenon known as binding.
Binding. Okay, I read about this in the sources, but help me visualize it. What exactly is the brain binding together?
To understand binding, you have to look at how fragmented our normal perception is. Right now, your brain is processing visual data in the occipital lobe, auditory data in the temporal lobe, physical sensation in the parietal lobe, and so on.
So it's all happening in different departments.
Exactly. In a standard beta state, these processes are slightly disjointed. But in gamma, the brain achieves this higher-level organization. It fuses all that disparate sensory information together into a single, perfectly unified, high-resolution perspective.
Wow. So instead of experiencing sight, sound, and touch as separate inputs that you have to kind of juggle, everything suddenly locks into a single, flawless mosaic.
It's the ultimate synthesis of your reality. And we know from clinical data that gamma seems exclusively tied to conscious awareness.
Right, because the moment a patient is put under general anesthesia, gamma activity completely evaporates from the brain, even if other lower-level brain waves keep going.
Exactly. Gamma is the signature of heightened unified awareness. And when we look at the brain scans of incredibly advanced meditators like Tibetan Buddhist monks who have spent tens of thousands of hours cultivating compassion,
We don't just see localized gamma, right? We see massive synchronous gamma activity across totally disparate areas of the cortex. The entire brain is vibrating at this unified frequency.
yeah, and in esoteric frameworks, this intense, harmonized outward focus is often what is meant by Christ consciousness or Krishna consciousness. It's universal compassion.
A state where you literally feel the interconnectedness of all living things because your brain is biologically binding all perception into one unified whole. There's no longer a harsh separation between the self and the other.
That alone is profound. But the research doesn't stop at 400 hertz. The clinical data documents brainwave activity significantly higher than that.
Yeah, and this is where it gets crazy. We are talking about hypergamma sitting around 100 hertz and then a state they call lambda, which vibrates at an astonishing 200 hertz.
200 hertz.
And I have to stop and push back here for a second. 200 hertz. From a purely biological standpoint, isn't a brain oscillating at 200 hertz practically experiencing a grand mal seizure? Like, how does the neurology handle that much sheer electricity?
It's a very logical question, and honestly, if you were to view a 200 hertz spike in a normal, untrained brain, you would likely assume it was pathological. You'd think it was a seizure or a severe manic episode.
Right, it looks like a short circuit.
But the crucial difference between pathology and enlightenment is order versus chaos. A seizure is an uncontrolled, chaotic electrical storm. Lambda, in the context of advanced meditation, is a highly ordered, laser-focused state of hypercoherence.
So it's the difference between a riot and a perfectly synchronized marching band, even though both involve a massive amount of human energy.
That's a perfect analogy. In highly advanced practitioners, lambda is associated with ecstatic states of consciousness and an unparalleled mastery over the physical body.
We see echoes of this potential in modern figures like Wim Hof, right?
Exactly. Or in the historical accounts of monks who sit in the freezing Himalayan snow and use the Tumo meditation technique to literally dry wet sheets draped over their bare shoulders using only their internal body heat.
Which is just wild to even think about.
That isn't a seizure. It is a moment of profound integrated oneness where the conscious mind asserts direct, voluntary control over the deepest layers of the autonomic nervous system.
Okay, so we have lambda operating at this blistering 200 hertz frequency at the absolute ceiling. But the researchers also discovered the exact opposite extreme, a state they named epsilon.
Yes. Epsilon sits far beneath delta. We are talking about brainwave activity slower than 0.5 hertz. In some extraordinary documented clinical cases of deep meditation, researchers have observed epsilon waves as slow as 1/4 of a cycle per second.
So that is one single brainwave rolling across the cortex every 10 seconds.
Yes.
I can't even imagine what that feels like. It's almost unfathomable stillness.
It is the biological equivalent of absolute zero. From the outside, a practitioner in an epsilon state appears to be in suspended animation. They exhibit no perceivable heartbeat, no obvious respiration, No measurable pulse.
It is the physiological manifestation of the ultimate void. And in the esoteric traditions, this is deeply linked to profound out-of-body experiences entering the white light and what is historically termed Buddha consciousness.
Or the ultimate realization of emptiness. It is walking the absolute razor's edge between life and death.
So we have lambda at 200 hertz, which is maximum processing speed, and epsilon at less than half a cycle per second, which is maximum stillness. But what totally blew my mind when reading through this research is that these two extremes are not opposites.
No, they aren't. There is a deeply intricate circular link between them. This is arguably the most staggering finding in modern neuroacoustic analysis. Epsilon and lambda are not isolated endpoints on a linear scale.
Right. They are structurally enmeshed within one another. The only way I could wrap my head around this was to think about a spinning object, like a bicycle wheel or a large fan.
The fan analogy is great, yeah.
If that fan is completely turned off and untouched, it's perfectly still. You can see every single blade. That is epsilon. But if you flip the switch and run that fan at its absolute maximum speed...
That's lambda.
Exactly. It spins so fast that the individual blades blur into a solid transparent disc. So from a distance, that incredibly fast motion actually looks perfectly still.
That visual aligns perfectly with the EEG data. Researchers found that if you isolate an epsilon wave, this massive, slow, glacial wave, and you increase the resolution of your equipment to zoom all the way in on it,
You find something hiding inside it.
you discover incredibly fast lambda waves modulating within the microscopic structure of the slow wave itself. And conversely, if you pull back and look at the macrostructure of a high-speed lambda state, you see that those 200 hertz spikes are actually riding on the crest of a super slow underlying epsilon modulation.
That is just gorgeous. It's essentially saying that the deepest, most silent stillness of the unconscious mind and the highest, most ecstatic processing speed of consciousness are the exact same state, just viewed from different resolutions.
Exactly. And this completely validates how ancient mystical traditions view ultimate enlightenment. To achieve true self-realization, a practitioner doesn't just pick one frequency.
Right. They don't just choose the active, unifying compassion of Christ consciousness or the silent, transcendent void of Buddha consciousness.
They navigate this circular link. They marry the extremes, achieving a state of total holographic wholeness, where maximum activity and maximum stillness coexist simultaneously.
Okay, this brings up a massive logistical question for me, though. If lambda and epsilon are the software programs, if they're the highest end operating systems a human can run, what in the world is powering the hardware?
You need a lot of power.
Because you can't run a supercomputer on a couple of AAA batteries. Hitting 200 hertz across the entire brain must require an unbelievable amount of physical energy.
So how do we fuel this?
Yeah.
Where is the quantum engine?
To find the power source for these superconscious states, we have to zoom all the way down to the cellular level. We have to look at the mitochondria.
The powerhouse of the cell, right. That's what we learned in high school biology.
Exactly. But what usually gets left out is that they are fundamentally electrical generators. The average human body contains roughly 75 trillion mitochondria. Depending on the tissue, they can occupy up to a fifth of a cell's total volume.
Wow, 75 trillion. And the electronic power produced across the membrane of a single cell is roughly 200 millivolts.
See, 200 millivolts doesn't sound like a lot of power to me. It sounds like a watch battery.
Individually, it is a tiny voltage, but you have to scale that up. When you multiply 200 millivolts by 7.5 times 10 to the 13th power, all those mitochondria functioning in unison across your entire body, it represents an astonishing, localized electromagnetic field.
The clinical texts we reviewed use a really great biological comparison for this. A hummingbird. A hummingbird can flap its wings up to 50 times a second. Every single micro movement of that incredible exertion is powered by mitochondrial energy.
But what is truly groundbreaking is how the mitochondria generate this power.
Right.
Because they don't operate according to classical Newtonian physics. They operate at the very edge of the quantum world.
I really want to unpack this because quantum biology sounds like a total sci-fi buzzword. How exactly is a microscopic, squishy organelle inside my liver or my brain using quantum mechanics?
It takes place in a highly specialized structure called the electron transport chain, specifically within microscopic configurations known as iron-sulfur clusters inside the cytochromes. To put this in perspective, your daily cellular metabolism processes roughly 32 to 38 moles of electrons every single day.
Okay, hold on. Moles of electrons. For those of us who haven't taken chemistry in a while, what does a mole mean in terms of pure quantity?
A mole is Avogadro's number. That's 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd power.
Which is an incomprehensibly massive number.
It really is. We are talking about trillions upon trillions of highly charged subatomic particles flowing through your body right now. But here's where the quantum weirdness happens. Inside the mitochondria, these electrons do not flow smoothly like water in a pipe. They move via a phenomenon called quantum tunneling.
Quantum tunneling. I've heard physicists use this term. It basically means a particle faces a barrier. It literally shouldn't have the energy to climb over or break through, and it just instantly appears on the other side. It teleports.
That is essentially correct. The electrons are faced with protein molecules within a microscopic space of roughly 1.4 nanometers. Instead of traveling through space classically, they harness their Waze-like probability functions to hop or tunnel directly through the barriers.
That is incredible.
Furthermore, the mitochondria actively manage the subatomic spin of these electrons. In doing so, your cells function as biological spintronic semiconductors. They don't just create heat, they generate highly coherent quantum energy and specific, organized electromagnetic fields.
So if I want my brain to hit gamma, lambda, or epsilon states, if I want to experience cosmic consciousness, I need those 75 trillion mitochondrial batteries operating at peak quantum efficiency.
You absolutely do.
How do we ensure they can do that? Because I'm guessing my morning routine of a sugary pastry and a highly caffeinated coffee isn't providing the right fuel for quantum tunneling.
You are entirely correct about that. Achieving and sustaining superconscious brainwave states requires a massive sustained turnover of ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, the cellular energy currency. If you are running your metabolism primarily on glucose, which most modern diets dictate, you are relying on a volatile, fast-burning fuel source. Glucose metabolism generates a significant amount of reactive oxygen species, also known as free radicals, which cause oxidative stress and literally damage the delicate quantum machinery of the mitochondria.
Wait, are you saying that reaching advanced states of enlightenment requires you to drop out of a glucose metabolism? Does enlightenment literally require a keto diet?
The biological data strongly suggests that to sustain the massive energetic demands of superconscious states without burning out the nervous system, the physical body must undergo a metabolic shift toward the beta oxidation of fatty acids.
Walk me through what beta oxidation actually means. How does someone force their body into that state?
Beta oxidation is the process by which the body breaks down fat molecules into ketones and acetyl-CoA to produce ATP. You force this shift primarily through extended fasting, specific dietary restrictions, like a highly structured ketogenic diet, devoid of simple carbohydrates, and deep meditative states that lower caloric demand.
So it's about changing the very fuel source your body relies on.
Exactly. From a biochemical standpoint, fatty acids are a much more stable, highly efficient, and incredibly clean-burning fuel source. They yield vastly more ATP per molecule than glucose and produce significantly less oxidative stress. This clean energy allows the mitochondria to maintain perfect quantum coherence.
Which creates the massive electromagnetic fields required to push the brain into lambda states.
You got it.
This perfectly bridges us to one of the most enigmatic concepts in the esoteric text we looked at. Ancient Chinese Taoist alchemists talked constantly about the ultimate goal of internal alchemy being the cultivation of the immortal fetus, or shengtai.
Yes, the shengtai.
When I first read that, I thought it was just deeply weird metaphorical poetry.
Right.
But based on what you're saying about metabolism, what does the immortal fetus actually represent biologically?
It is definitely not a literal physical baby growing inside the practitioner, despite some of the wilder literal interpretations out there. When we synthesize these ancient alchemical texts with modern neurobiology and quantum metabolism, a very clear picture emerges.
Okay, what is it?
The immortal fetus is a highly precise metaphorical term for a hypothesized state of total biological optimization. It represents a physical body that has shifted to an ultra-efficient fat metabolism, synchronized its neural oscillations, and fundamentally altered its internal fluid dynamics.
Let's compare a normal body to a body gestating this immortal fetus. When you and I are awake, stressed out, answering emails in that beta state, our sympathetic nervous system is highly active, right?
Yes, which means our brain is flooded with a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine.
And when norepinephrine is high, a crucial biological mechanism called the glymphatic system is completely shut down.
That is a critical point. The glymphatic system is the brain's internal waste clearance mechanism. Norepinephrine actively suppresses it. But when an advanced practitioner enters deep, sustained meditation, when they drop their brain waves down into high-amplitude delta or epsilon, their sympathetic nervous system quiets down, and norepinephrine levels plummet.
And then what happens?
When this happens, the glial cells in the brain actually shrink slightly, opening up the physical spaces between the neurons. The glymphatic system activates, and cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, rushes in to literally wash the brain parenchyma.
The alchemical texts describe this process so beautifully. They don't use the word glymphatic, of course. They talk about a nectar descending from the heavens to anoint the neural tissues.
Biologically, that nectar is the cerebrospinal fluid, and it is heavily saturated with powerful neurochemicals. It bathes the brain in melatonin and trace amounts of endogenous DMT released from the pineal gland.
And melatonin isn't just a sleep aid, right? It's one of the most powerful antioxidants in the human body.
Exactly. The melatonin physically repairs the neural tissue, aggressively scavenging the free radicals that damage the mitochondria. It protects the quantum engine.
And this is where the perspective of the famous analytical psychologist Carl Jung provides an incredible philosophical bridge. Jung spent years collaborating with the Nobel Prize-winning quantum physicist Wolfgang Pauli.
A fascinating collaboration.
Together, they explored this concept called unus mundus, which is Latin for one world. They proposed a framework of dual-aspect monism.
Right, the idea that the physical material world and the internal psychological world are not separate things. They're just two sides of the exact same underlying reality.
Yes, Jung was intensely fascinated by the phenomenon of synchronicity. These highly meaningful coincidences where a person's internal psychological state perfectly and inexplicably mirrors an external physical event, entirely defying standard cause and effect.
Like the story in our materials where Jung documented a case where 3 separate deaths in a single family were supposedly forecast by massive flocks of birds inexplicably gathering outside the window of the dying relative.
To Jung and Pauli, these events implied a shared underlying structural background where consciousness and quantum physics become entangled.
So when we talk about cultivating the immortal fetus, we aren't just talking about a biological trick. The physical optimization of the mitochondria, the shift to beta oxidation, and the glymphatic washing of the brain perfectly mirror the psychological crystallization of the true self.
The biology and the spirituality are completely, inextricably entangled. You cannot have one without the other.
Exactly. The physical transformation is the spiritual transformation.
Okay, so let's say the hardware is upgraded. The quantum engine is humming cleanly on fatty acids, the cells are generating 200 millivolts each, and the brain is washed and primed. How does that massive energetic potential actually travel from the base of the body up into the skull to trigger these superconscious brainwave states?
For this, we have to look closely at the work of the late biomedical researcher Itzhak Bentov. He developed what is known as the physio-kundalini model.
Right, because the ancients describe Kundalini awakening as a coiled serpent of energy shooting up the spine.
Bentov proposed that this isn't some mystical, invisible magic. It is a highly specific, totally measurable mechanical chain reaction that takes place within the body's cardiovascular and nervous systems.
And it all starts with the heart. I want to walk through Bentov's 5-step model in detail because it is fascinating. Step 1. It begins with the heart aorta system. When you sit in deep meditation, you quiet your breath.
Yes, and as your breathing slows and synchronizes, the heart and the aorta essentially begin to resonate together, producing a rhythmic, mechanical oscillation of exactly 7 hertz.
Which is a very specific, slow vibration. This leads directly to step 2. That 7 hertz physical vibration travels out from the heart, up the spinal column, and into the skull.
Because the brain is physically suspended in a bath of cerebrospinal fluid, that 7 hertz pulse causes a micromotion. The entire physical brain begins to bounce or accelerate up and down inside the cranial vault at that exact frequency.
Okay, step 3. The shape of the skull becomes incredibly important here. Because the brain is bouncing and it contains these hollow, fluid-filled cavities called ventricles, this up and down movement creates acoustic standing waves.
Think of it like taking a crystal bowl filled with water and rubbing the rim until the water starts to form perfectly geometric stationary ripples. Sound waves are bouncing back and forth perfectly inside the brain.
And step 4 is where the practitioner goes from just sitting quietly to experiencing a radical shift in consciousness. These acoustic standing waves inside the ventricles begin to mechanically stimulate the adjacent sensory cortex.
This friction creates a closed-loop electrical current that physically travels around the hemispheres of the brain. The meditator experiences this internally generated electrical loop as a very real physical tingling.
It often manifests as intense heat or an electric sensation rising from the base of the spine, shooting up into the head.
That is the classic Kundalini awakening experience described in the tantric texts. And when this electrical loop hits the pleasure centers in the limbic system, it triggers those states of profound bliss and ecstasy we associate with enlightenment.
Exactly. And then we reach step 5. According to the laws of electromagnetism, whenever you have an electrical current moving in a loop, it generates a magnetic field.
This closed-loop current in the sensory cortex creates pulsating magnetic fields of opposing polarities radiating out around the practitioner's head.
This is where we return to my absolute favorite concept from this entire deep dive, the idea of the human body acting as a quantum resonator.
Biologically and electromagnetically, that is exactly what happens. That pulsating magnetic field generated around the meditator's head operates at roughly 7 hertz. What makes it so staggering from a physics perspective is that the Earth itself possesses a naturally occurring electromagnetic field.
The Schumann resonance, right?
Yes, it is created by lightning strikes in the ionosphere, and it vibrates at a predominant baseline frequency of about 7.5 hertz.
7 hertz in the brain, 7.5 hertz in the earth? That is vastly too close to be a coincidence.
It is the biological equivalent of tuning a guitar to perfectly match another instrument. It allows the practitioner's brain to fall into resonant entrainment with the Earth's environmental and cosmic electromagnetic fields.
So we literally become a human radio tower.
The human nervous system begins to act as both a transmitting and a receiving antenna. Modulations, data, and fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field feed directly into the practitioner's local magnetic field.
And the brain interprets this subtle cosmic data as profound intuition, expanded cosmic awareness, or what we might call psychic perception.
It provides a purely biophysical explanation for how a master yogi can remain in perfect health, effortlessly adapting to environmental changes. Their nervous system is literally fundamentally attuned to the resonance of the planet at a pre-conscious level.
Okay, let's just take a breath because this is incredibly heavy. We've established that humans possess quantum tunneling mitochondria. We can generate acoustic standing waves in our skulls. We are literal cosmic antennas.
It's a lot of machinery.
It is. If this astonishing biological machinery is built into the blueprint of every single human being alive right now, why aren't we all walking around in a state of Christ or Buddha consciousness? What is physically stopping us?
The answer to that, according to both ancient internal alchemy and modern bioenergetics, comes down to a single concept: energy leakage. The biological engine requires immense concentrated fuel, and most of us are constantly, habitually bleeding that fuel dry.
The Taoists have a very specific framework for understanding this energy economy. They map it out using 3 distinct substances: Jing, Qi, and Shen. We need to define these clearly to understand how we are sabotaging ourselves.
Right. Jing translates roughly to generative essence. In Western physiological terms, it correlates most closely to our foundational hormonal reserves, our endocrine secretions, and the deep, vital baseline energy present within every living cell. It is the raw material.
Above that is Qi, which is the dynamic, vital energy or life force that circulates through the body's meridians and powers daily action.
And finally, there is Shen, which represents spirit, or the highly refined superconscious awareness that resides in the brain and correlates with those gamma and lambda states.
And the crucial rule of Taoist alchemy is that this transformation only works in one sequential direction. You have to turn Jing into Qi, and then you turn Ji into Shen.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You cannot cultivate Shen, that high-level cosmic spiritual awareness, if you do not have an abundance of circulating Qi. And you cannot generate Qi if you have depleted your foundational Jing.
Because Jing is the biological battery. If the battery is empty, the alchemical chain reaction simply cannot start. It doesn't matter how much you meditate, the hardware won't run.
So how do we deplete our Jing? The texts we reviewed are incredibly blunt about this. It comes down to habitual energy dissipation.
And the absolute #1 culprit they identify across almost every major esoteric tradition, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, is sexual leakage.
Yes. In the tantric traditions, this vital essence is referred to as ojas or bindu. The ancient manuals state explicitly that reaching advanced metabolic and spiritual states requires meticulously preserving these generative essences.
From a purely biological standpoint, the physical act of orgasm, particularly for men through ejaculation, dissipates an absolutely massive amount of highly concentrated biochemical energy, zinc, trace minerals, and neurotransmitters.
But it is crucial to note that it is not just sexual leakage that drains us.
Right, it's our entire modern lifestyle. living in a chronic state of stress, constantly doom scrolling on our phones, chasing cheap dopamine hits, overstimulating our nervous systems. That constant frantic beta brainwave state rapidly depletes our jing.
Our adrenals are exhausted. We are constantly draining the biological battery just to survive the workday.
There is a really fascinating secular validation of this ancient concept found in our research materials, specifically from Napoleon Hill. In the early 20th century, Hill conducted an exhaustive analysis of over 25,000 highly successful individuals to figure out the common denominators of extraordinary achievement.
And he found a staggering, almost universal pattern regarding age and success. Hill discovered that men who succeed in a truly outstanding, paradigm-shifting way seldom achieve that success before the age of 40.
And very often do not hit their peak until they are well beyond 50.
Exactly. And his conclusion wasn't just that they needed more time to network or gain experience. He concluded that prior to that age, these men were completely dissipating their vital energies through the overindulgence of the physical expression of sex.
It is only when they learn, either through aging or through conscious discipline, to harness that immense internal fire and transmute that generative sexual energy into creative, mental, or spiritual action that they finally achieve greatness.
It is a powerful, modern confirmation of the ancient alchemical texts. The vital biological energy you expend in physical reproduction is the exact same fundamental energy required for neuroalchemical transformation and superconscious brainwave generation. You only have so much fuel. You have to choose where to spend it.
But wait, we need to be really, really careful here, because a listener might hear this and immediately think, okay, I get it. The secret to enlightenment and success is just total, rigid, repressed celibacy. I just need to shut that part of myself off.
Which is the wrong takeaway. The ancient sources warn incredibly heavily against doing that. Forced physical celibacy or rigid restraint without the concurrent cultivation of mental emptiness is not just useless. It is actively dangerous to the physical and mental health of the practitioner.
Dangerous how? Can you explain the mechanics of that?
If you simply suppress the physical act of sex through sheer willpower, but you allow your mind to dwell constantly on sexual thoughts, fantasies, or frustrations, you are actively stirring the jing.
You're heating up that vital energy.
But you are completely denying it a physical pathway to release, and you aren't providing it an alchemical pathway to transmute. This creates severe energetic stagnation and blockages within the nervous and meridian systems.
In traditional Chinese medicine, this kind of stagnation is the root cause of profound physical illness and severe psychological distress. You see the tragic results of this in the dried up, joyless, sunken faces of certain dogmatic ascetics who force physical celibacy but lack any true inner peace. It can literally drive a person mentally unbalanced.
So, if forced repression is dangerous and constant indulgence drains the battery, what is the actual solution? The Tower texts use a very specific phrase: unmindfulness of sensations.
Yes, the path is not repression, it is conscious detachment. When physical desire or vital energy arises in the body, you do not violently suppress it out of shame, nor do you compulsively act upon it to relieve the tension. You simply sit with it.
You observe the biological sensation, and through deep meditation, you allow that psychological desire to dissolve into absolute mental emptiness.
And when you achieve that true mental emptiness, the body's physics take over. The conserved jing naturally reroutes itself. Instead of moving downward to be expelled from the body, the energy reverses its flow.
It is drawn upward via the body's primary energetic meridians, specifically the Genmai channel running up the front of the body and the Tu-mai channel running up the spine. It travels up into the skull to physically nourish the brain and generate Shen.
Returning your jing to renew the brain, that is the literal physical definition of internal alchemy.
It is.
Okay, this theory is absolutely mind-bending, but at the beginning of this deep dive, we promised actionable steps. We know the destination, we know how the engine works, and we know we need to conserve our fuel. How exactly do we safely cultivate these states? How do we fire up our quantum mitochondria and push that energy up the spine? Let's get into the actionable blueprint. We're talking about specific, step-by-step meditations and breath work.
The foundational tool for all of this, the master key to the nervous system, is the breath. We discussed earlier how dropping into deep brainwave states allows the lymphatic system to wash the brain with cerebrospinal fluid. What you need to understand is that your physical breath is the literal mechanical pump for that fluid.
Right, because the brain doesn't have a heart to pump CSF. When you inhale and exhale deeply, you are changing the intrathoracic and intra-abdominal pressure in your torso. You are creating physical pressure differentials that literally squeeze and push that cerebrospinal fluid from the base of your sacrum all the way up your spinal cord and into your brain.
Therefore, actionable step 1 is mastering basic, rhythmic breath work to consciously modulate the autonomic nervous system. The clinical data strongly supports techniques like box breathing, which is inhaling for a count of 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and holding empty for 4.
Alternatively, practices like Tumo or the Wim Hof method, which incorporate cycles of forceful hyperventilation followed by profound, empty breath retentions. These physical techniques have been proven to rapidly spike gamma brainwave activity, significantly increase melatonin production, and heavily pump that vital CSF up the spine.
But the ancient manuals also provide us with some deeply advanced, highly specific Kundalini Tantra techniques. I want to walk through a few of these exactly as they are described, starting with the practice called Ajapa Japa, which translates to the mantra of breath.
Ajapa Japa is profoundly simple in its execution, but incredibly powerful in its effect on the nervous system. You begin by sitting in a comfortable, upright posture. You do not try to control or force your breathing. You simply become a silent witness to your natural breath.
As your concentration deepens, you'll begin to realize that the natural friction of the air entering the body inherently sounds like the syllable so, and the exhalation inherently sounds like ham.
Yam, Sam.
Exactly. You are not vocalizing the mantra. The mantra is already continuously happening inside you. You are just discovering it. The next step is to synchronize this mental sound with your physical awareness of the body's frontal psychic passage, which runs between the navel and the throat. As you hear the inner poo, you visualize and feel the breath rising from the navel up to the throat. As you hear ham, you feel it descend from the throat back to the navel. This continuous loop powerfully focuses the mind, immediately halts the habitual leakage of mental energy, and begins to clear blockages in that primary frontal meridian.
Okay, now let's look at a practice that is quite a bit more intense, physically speaking. It's called Morsha Pranayama, or the swooning breath. The manual gives very exact, almost surgical instructions for this.
It does. Morsha Pranayama is an advanced technique specifically designed to safely induce a state of light, blissful calmness by directly, mechanically manipulating the blood pressure and energetic flow within the cranial cavity.
Step 1. Sit in a steady posture. Step 2 involves incorporating a physical mudra, specifically Kachari mudra. Can you explain the anatomy of what that is?
Kachari mudra involves stretching and folding the tongue backward and pressing the underside of it firmly against the soft palate at the roof of the mouth. In esoteric anatomy, the tongue acts as a highly conductive biological switch.
Pressing it to the roof of the mouth physically bridges the gap between the Genmai frontal meridian and the Tumai spinal meridian, allowing the electrical energy to flow in a continuous, unbroken loop throughout the body.
So tongue securely pressed to the roof of the mouth. Then you inhale very slowly, using an ujjayi breath, which is that slight, deliberate constriction in the back of the throat that sounds a bit like Darth Vader or ocean waves.
And as you inhale, you gently bend your head backward, moving into a second mudra called Shambhavi mudra.
Shambhavi mudra involves turning your eyes upward and gazing intently inward at the space between your eyebrows, the anatomical location associated with the Ajna chakra or the third eye.
So to combine it, your head is leaning back, your eyes are crossed upward, your tongue is locked to the roof of your mouth, and you are inhaling with that raspy throat friction.
At the very end of that long inhalation, you hold the breath. You retain the air in your lungs, and you shift your mental attention to the bindu, which is a specific focal point located at the very top back of the head.
Then you slowly exhale, again using that ujjayi throat friction, while smoothly bending your head forward and closing your eyes.
It is a complex sequence, but this highly specific combination of breath retention, neck posture, tongue placement, and internal ocular focus creates a massive, localized shift in intracranial pressure and vagus nerve stimulation.
It safely and mechanically pushes the practitioner into a swooning, deeply euphoric state where the analytical beta mind shuts off and gamma and theta waves begin to profoundly flourish.
The manuals also detail practices that involve actively visualizing the chakras, specifically a technique called chakra badan, or piercing the chakras, which ties directly into the Taoist concept of the microcosmic orbit.
Yes, this is a vital practice for ensuring the energy you cultivate doesn't get stuck. It involves mentally tracing the movement of the breath up the body's frontal passage, which Tantra calls the Arahan, starting from the root chakra at the base of the spine all the way up to the head.
And then tracing it down the spinal passage, the Awarohan, back to the base. Crucially, you must mentally touch or acknowledge each specific chakra point as the energy passes it.
Over months and years of practice, this visualization perfectly smooths out the flow of qi, systematically removing the psychological and physical blockages that manifest as disease and mental distress.
But there is a massive warning provided in these texts regarding these advanced practices. When you start successfully doing this, when your vital energy stops leaking out and starts hitting your brain in entirely new ways, you are likely going to start experiencing what the texts call the shadow side of clear consciousness.
It is a very common trap for intermediate practitioners. As dormant neural pathways light up and qi channels open, you may begin to experience minor psychic phenomena. You might suddenly feel intense, localized heat, hear internal ringing or humming sounds, see flashes of geometric light, or even experience brief moments of clairvoyance or strange visions.
The alchemical texts warn us absolutely unequivocally. Do not become fascinated by these phenomena.
Because they aren't the point. They're just the exhaust fumes of your neurology rewiring itself. If you get caught up in thinking, oh, wow, look at me, I'm levitating, I have superpowers now, I'm a mystic, you instantly feed your ego.
And the moment your ego inflates, your brainwaves crash right back down into beta, and your spiritual progression completely halts.
The visions are a distraction. The ultimate goal of all of this biological manipulation is to reach the state of qi, which translates to respiratory cessation or perfect stillness.
It is the destination we spoke of at the beginning. It is the state where the physical body is so incredibly oxygen efficient, and the mind has achieved such absolute profound emptiness that the glacial epsilon waves and the hyperfast lambda waves perfectly harmonize. That is the true biological and spiritual summit.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. What does this all mean for us? We have covered an absolutely staggering amount of ground in this deep dive. We started by looking at the absolute microscopic foundation of life, the literal quantum tunneling of electrons moving through the 75 trillion mitochondria in your body, functioning together as a massive 200 millivolt biological battery.
We examined how shifting our basic metabolism away from volatile glucose and toward the clean-burning beta-oxidation of fats preserves that delicate quantum energy.
We learned how dropping our stress and norepinephrine levels allows the brain's lymphatic system to physically wash our neural tissues with cerebrospinal fluid, melatonin, and endogenous DMT, providing the biological basis for what the ancient alchemists called the immortal fetus.
We look at the brilliant biophysics of Itzhak Bentov, showing how a calm 7 Hz heartbeat creates acoustic standing waves inside the skull, ultimately turning the human nervous system into a magnetic antenna perfectly tuned to receive the Earth's Schumann resonance.
And we confronted the harsh, demanding truth of the internal alchemical texts, that absolutely none of this magnificent biological machinery can turn on if we are constantly dissipating our foundational jing through chronic modern stress, dopamine addiction, and sexual image. We have to practice true mental emptiness to reroute that vital energy upward.
And finally, we gave you the blueprint, the mechanics of pumping your cerebrospinal fluid through box breathing, the silent internal Soham mantra of Ajapa Japa.
The complex, swooning breath of Morcha Pranayama, the tools to actually open the circuits. We've seen today that the anatomy of a human being isn't just a random meat sack designed to survive and pay taxes. It is perfectly biologically engineered to house the infinite potential of universal consciousness.
Which brings us to a final paradigm-shifting thought, deeply inspired by the intersection of these esoteric and scientific texts. If our consciousness truly operates at the absolute edge of the quantum world, where our high-frequency brainwaves can dictate the physical reality of our biology, right down to managing the subatomic spin of an electron inside our mitochondria, then perhaps the story of human evolution is no longer just a slow, random physical process driven by external environments over millions of years.
Wow, that is a massive thought.
What if the next monumental stage of human evolution is entirely an inside job? What if our progression as a species is now governed solely by our willingness to simply sit still, consciously focus our breath, preserve our vital energy, and deliberately entangle our minds with the fabric of the universe?
The machinery required to do that is already inside you right now. You just have to learn how to turn it on. Every single breath you take is an opportunity to move that fluid, preserve your foundational energy, and tune your internal antenna to a much higher frequency. Until next time, keep your antenna up and keep diving deep into the extraordinary potential of your own biology.